So before we dive into what is going to be a really amazing program this evening, I have a lot of things, as usual, that I want to share with you. And one of the things that I also want to do that we don't always remember to do is to honor and remember that we are standing on the land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people, and we want to honor them, honor their struggles as we fight in all these struggles for all people. So just wanted to call that out. Thank you. So what I have to tell you, kind of along in that vein of thinking about the struggles, is that today, really, my dear friends who have come here tonight, I am really heartbroken. Today has been a terrible day for our country. It's been a terrible day for us at the ACLU. To have the Supreme Court decision come down on the Muslim ban this morning, and to say that that could be upheld is truly a dark moment in American history. It is a dark moment akin to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. It is akin to the moment of Japanese internment. And it is this moment where it's so utterly heartbreaking and, like, as Anila Afzali said in a rally earlier today, like a punch in the stomach, that those words that are written on paper that are so beautiful still are not applying to everyone in this country, and we have so much work to do. And in particular, against the backdrop of last week, that was also such a painful week as more information was coming forward about families and children separated, babies being pulled literally out of their mother's arms. We have problems right now, people, that we have got to attend to. And what I want to tell you is that the ACLU obviously is still in the fight, and your presence here tonight suggests to me that you're still in the fight too, but it's a sobering moment. So I want to thank you for being here, but we can't give up our joint struggle for equity and inclusion and true justice for everyone. So, all right. This past weekend was Pride Weekend, and I hope that actually was a wonderful celebration for folks. Was that a good, did you guys have a good Pride Weekend? So as you may know, the Stonewall riots of 1969 were a series of uprisings by members of the LGBTQIA community against discrimination, against police harassment, against so many things, and that was really such a precursor to so many things. Many, many gay pride rallies and marches happened that year, and it's often thought of as a real catalyst for the strength of the pride movement and the fight for LGBTQ liberation. And so it's really fitting, in particular, because so many of the leaders of Stonewall were transgender women who really lifted up the cause and got everyone engaged. It's really appropriate for us to have the panel that we're having tonight, and I'm super excited about it. We had an amazing conversation one for you. So before I introduce our amazing panelists, let me just go through some of our logistical stuff that we often walk through, right? So social media, we are live streaming, so you can tell your friends they can watch it on the ACLU Facebook page. And also you can post your thoughts and comments as usual to whatever social media vehicle you like with the hashtag ACLU Flights. As always, we're super grateful to KEXP, so please join me in thanking them for offering us this space to gather. Also super excited to thank Flying Bite Brewery. This is their second time back with us. They are so delicious. And even better than being just delicious, they're actually Washington State's first democratically run, member-owned and operated cooperative brewery. So that is So as usual, as we do every month, there is a raffle. If you have not filled out the little paperwork, I hope that you will get a chance to get that in a jar, because we have either one or two prizes. Will someone, it's two prizes, right, Caitlin? It's two prizes? There's two prizes, so two people will have a chance to win, must be present to win, so you gotta stay for the end. So that happens after our question and answer period tonight. Okay, so as usual at the ACLU, we've been a little bit busy. Last month I told you that the ACLU nationwide had taken more than 150 legal actions against our current president and his hateful agenda. That number is now 170 and counting. This includes fighting him on the Muslim ban, which we are still going to continue to do, my friends. We will still keep fighting it. Fighting on abortion rights, voting rights, and discrimination in numerous forms. Some of those fights we thought might be behind us, but we will continue with renewed vigor and on the road to victory. So what we need to remember is that with each new assault on the rights of some of us, on the rights that some of us may take for granted, what's true for too many people in the community is that they're still in a state of struggle and still in a state of not being welcomed and received and treated as the full human beings that they are. And this is especially true in the transgender community, all too familiar with the experience of erasure, misunderstanding, and tragically high rates of violence. The bigoted words, acts, and laws of the current administration are really on the top of a long-standing and dire fight for the right to simply exist. So it is an honor to be joined by our panelists this evening. They are leaders of the critical fight for transgender justice. They are leaders who have been engaged in this work for many years, and they have a great deal to teach us. The ACLU fights for legal rights for transgender individuals, and we'll be hearing about some of that work on our panel, but the lawsuits are only one tactic. And the truth is that to get justice for transgender people, there's a whole lot more work that has to be done. And for many of us, that begins with listening to transgender people, trusting their experiences, and asking what we can do better. Recently, I was at the ACLU membership conference. We were there. Is anybody else here who was there? So it was pretty amazing. You know, I see some hands in the back. You missed out on Questlove and Betty Levette and some other amazing things, as well as great information. So I was in a session at the first day that included a person who'd been formerly incarcerated who works for the ACLU to fight for equity in the criminal justice system. There was a transgender advocate who works for an ACLU in Indiana. There was a Muslim person who's a civil rights advocate. And the question that was put before the three of them was, what does it mean to be an ally, and how can people be allies for them? And they all agreed that the true task of being an ally is a journey of listening, of making space, and honoring the leadership of the people in the communities that you want to support. And at the ACLU, I'll be clear, we are in a journey of listening and learning and honoring the leadership of others. And we want you to join in that journey with us tonight. So I thank you for being here, and I especially thank our panelists who you might want to start coming up. That would be fantastic. To take time out of their busy lives to talk to us. So we're going to have a facilitated conversation. You just come all the way up to here. This is me. We're going to have a facilitated conversation, after which there will be some time for questions from you. So I'm just going to start with introducing them, and I think I have them. Oh, this is not alphabetical at all. So when I call your name to introduce you, just like wave so they know who you are. Okay. So Karter Booher. Did I say your last name right? Okay, thank you. Karter goes by the pronouns they, them. Karter is the executive director of Ingersoll Gender Center, one of our country's oldest trans-run organizations. They have over 10 years of community organizing and advocacy experience, are passionate about trans liberation movements as an entry point to helping all communities access their full self-determination in a world free from violence. Jeremiah Allen, he, him. Jeremiah is a queer, trans-masculine, Black, and Indigenous tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Lakota Sioux Tribe, and currently serves as the project director with Pride Foundation for Transform Washington, a statewide public education campaign celebrating the lives and experiences of transgender and gender diverse people. He also sat on the executive committee of Washington Won't Discriminate, which successfully fought not one, but two anti-transgender ballot initiatives in 2016 and 2017. Danni Askini, she, her. Danni is one of the founders and the current executive director of the Gender Justice League and of Trans Pride Seattle. Woo! Yes. She was the former national program director for the GSA Network, the policy director for Basic Rights Oregon, and the first transgender health program director at Verbena Health, where she ran the Transform Health Project. There's a fan here. Marsha Botzer, she, her. Marsha has served the LGBT and progressive communities for over 40 years as a founding member in Equality Washington, on the boards of Pride Foundation, Safe Schools, Lambert House, Seattle Counseling Service, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and among many other positions. Marsha is the past co-chair of Seattle's LGBT Commission, served as co-chair of the National LGBTQ Task Force, is a founding member of Out in Front Leadership Project, founded Seattle's Ingersoll Gender Center, and served as national co-chair of the 2008 Obama Pride campaign. And Marsha has received numerous awards, including the ACLU of Washington's William O. Douglas Lifetime Achievement Award. It's Marsha. I have Lisa Nowlin, she, her. Lisa is a staff member at ACLU of Washington. After attending the Seattle University, Lisa worked as a volunteer coordinator for Lifelong AIDS Alliance. She then went on to New York University Law School, during which she interned with the National ACLU LGBT and HIV Project and the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. Lisa helped found NYU-WA's LGBT Rights Clinic and has volunteered with name change and legal services clinics in New York, DC, and Seattle. After law school, Lisa clerked with a federal judge and practiced with the firm Paul Hastings and Keller Rohrbach, and joined us at the ACLU in 2017. And it's a great time. Last, and absolutely not least, is Monseratt Padilla. Monseratt has been organizing LGBTQ immigrant and communities of color on the ground for over 10 years to build collective movement power. She was a co-founder of the Washington Dream Coalition and has led national and statewide campaigns, including the Washington State Dream Act, to expand eligibility for state aid in higher education to undocumented students. Monseratt worked as the National Program Coordinator for the Queer Undocumented Immigrant Project, a program of United We Dream, and is now the statewide coordinator for the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. Born in Jalisco, Mexico, at the age of 2, she migrated to the US with her mother, grew up in East Los Angeles, and became part of the 11 million undocumented families in the US. Moving to Seattle at 15, graduating from Chief Sealth International High School, and attending the University of Washington, Seattle. Please join me again in welcoming our first panel. So I'm going to begin by asking all of our panelists to say a little bit about their current work, just a brief overview of your work and your organization, and I'm just going to start on the end with Jeremiah. So there's a couple of microphones, you've got one, and it's live.
Thank you. As was mentioned, I work with Pride Foundation, which is an LGBTQ regional philanthropy organization. We mainly give grants and scholarships to folks in the Pacific Northwest region, and that's Washington, Montana, Idaho, Alaska, and Oregon. But we also do special initiatives, and that's what I lead, Transform Washington. It's a statewide public education campaign. We do educating around transgender people and their families around Washington State. We do a lot of polling and research about how to engage with the general voting public in order to educate them bestly about transgender and gender diverse folks. And we also do media training. And Transform Washington worked very closely, in addition to being on the executive committee with Washington Won't Discriminate, we worked very closely with the campaign about how to formulate messages in order to educate and help the voting public. And most recently, we worked very closely with the campaign in Alaska. They also faced a anti-trans ballot initiative in Anchorage and was also very successful, and so we're really excited about that. We work very closely with other national leaders who do trans advocacy work, and yeah, it's a little bit of the program to me.
So hello folks, my name is Monseratt Padilla. Again, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the statewide coordinator of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. What we do, first of all, who we are, we're an organization that came out of after the Trump administration was elected into office. Right now there's over 150 organizations who have come together on the network with the understanding that not one single organization could really protect and defend immigrant and refugee folks across the state of Washington, but that only together we could really build that collective power to do that. What we do, our bread and butter of our work is, probably for some of you folks that were able to enter, you saw a flyer that we have. It really teaches folks on what to do once ICE comes knocking at your door. We have a hotline that's open 7 days a week that is there to protect our immigrant communities whenever they see a suspicious vehicle in front of their homes, or if they start seeing raids of ICE happening all across the state. We have teams in Tenasket and Mattawa and Wenatchee. Most of those cities, I'm sure you don't even know where that's at in a map, but we have them here in Washington State. And that's how much of the work that we're doing that's really been driven by local communities in these little rural towns. In addition to just the very frontline work that we do in stopping deportations, we also do a lot of advocacy work, tech work to build cutting-edge tools to support our communities to stopping deportations. And in terms of policy and advocacy, I mean, as you all seen, today has been a tough day for our Muslim brothers and sisters. And we lead a multi-faith, multi-ethnic coalition that helps really bring communities together to stand up and fight back against social injustices. In addition, the Families Belong Together campaign has been launched. I want to invite everybody here today for June 30th at 11 o'clock in the morning at the SeaTac Federal Prison, which we will be coming together to really show that Washington has had enough with the collaboration between ICE, CBP, and local enforcement, and to send a clear message to Congress, which they will be back on June 30th, so we really need everybody to take action during that week of action. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, again, my name is Karter, and I'm with Ingersoll Gender Center. We're one of the nation's oldest trans-led nonprofits. We're 41 years old, and we do a number of things, everything from oh my goodness, I think I'm trans, what do I do? To more complicated direct advocacy, resource navigation. We run a support group that has met every week without interruption for 44 years now. It's all volunteer-led. We have anywhere from 35 to 85 trans and gender non-conforming folks who come together to build community, find resources, and really just find their own way through their transition. And we have a really deep commitment to helping connect people to resources and helping them build the tools to advocate for themselves, specifically around economic justice issues and healthcare access, and really taking all those stories and frustrations that we have and helping people navigate through those systems and sharing them with other folks on the stage to further our policy advocacy efforts. We work really closely with many of the professionals in this room and healthcare providers and legislators to really elevate the stories of the folks that we hear every day. And we have much more information in the back and a community financial assistance program too.
Hi, my name's Danni. I'm the Executive Director of Gender Justice League. It's such an honor to be on the stage with so many amazing colleagues that I get to work with every day. It's such a pleasure. So Gender Justice League is a multifaceted advocacy, civil and human rights organization. We put on Trans Pride Seattle, which happened this last Friday. I'm still exhausted and slept very late into the morning until I had to bring somebody to SeaTac to pick them on a plane this afternoon because it was exhausting. So we do that every year. This was our 6th year. We helped with Jeremiah and Karter and Say. We fought 6 anti-trans bathroom bills in our state legislature in the 2016-2017 session. We were on the executive committee for Washington State. Thank you. We do a lot of work at the intersections of gender-based violence and trans and gender diverse identities, and so what that looks like is expanding access to reproductive health care, pushing the state to be responsive to the HIV crisis within trans communities, working to address domestic violence, sexual assault, and childhood sexual abuse targeted at trans and gender diverse people, and that includes all LGBT people. And yeah, we also help to expand health insurance access. I worked on that for over a decade in California, Oregon, and in Washington State, in all 3 states, to ensure that all trans people can access transition-related health care through their health insurance company in a non-discriminatory way. And I think, like Ingersoll, I'm so grateful that they're also helping folks to navigate that system now that we've sort of moved policy forward, helping people actually, because health insurance, everybody hates health insurance, right? It's terrible and it's so hard to get coverage for stuff. And so working to partner to make sure that we hold insurers accountable and make sure that people get the care that they need. So that's what we do.
And Marsha Botzer, she and her. All right, okay, so in 1962, right down there by the fountain that talks about the evolution of human beings. I stood there at the Seattle World's Fair. I have to tell you this story because that's what I'm feeling right now. At that point, I knew there was something going on around gender and identity, but I couldn't put words to it, and I had no dream that I would ever sit with my colleagues or with you together in this struggle. My goodness sakes. Okay, well, all right. So anyway, I've started a lot of things. Equal Rights Washington, founded there, and all these things. That's been my work for years. Now at this stage, I've gotten back into the labor movement. I'm a trustee on the Martin Luther King County Labor Council, and that's led me into another way of looking at all our work and expanding it to other areas. So I'm so proud that I've lived long enough to see Ingersoll, which I started in '77, grow up, and now with Karter as our executive director, grow to the next stage. It's fantastic, I tell you. All right, more later. I'll tell you that.
I'm Lisa Nowlin, she, her, and it's a wonderful privilege to be up here with all of these wonderful colleagues. And I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU, and since you're all here, I'm assuming you at least know what the ACLU is. But for those of you that don't, we are a nationwide civil rights and civil liberties organization. And we specifically are the ACLU of Washington, which is a state affiliate focusing particularly in Washington state. And so we work on civil rights and civil liberties issues ranging from LGBTQ rights to mass incarceration, to racial justice, to immigration, to reproductive rights, to privacy rights, to First Amendment. Probably missing some, but it's a wide range of issues that we work on. And we have a wide variety of tools in our toolbox that we use to further those rights. So we do organization, we work, we have lobbying, we do policy advocacy, we do field work, we try to educate the public and let them know about these important issues. And we also do litigation. And so I'll be talking a little bit later about some of the litigation that we have going on right now. We've also worked with many of the people up here as part of various coalitions working with Washington Won't Discriminate and on the birth certificate issues and things like that. So yeah, that's the ACLU.
So I just, as I get into asking some individual questions of our panelists, I just realized I didn't actually tell you who I am. And some of you have been here before, but I definitely see some new faces. So my name is Michelle Storms, she, her. I also work for the ACLU. I'm the deputy director, and I want to tell you that I am honored and humbled to be moderating this conversation this evening. So with that, let's get going. So Marsha, I'm going to start with you. Over the years, you've been at the forefront of so much of the trans justice work in Washington State, ever since standing in front of the fountain in 1962. So I would like to know from you, in what areas do you feel like you've seen significant progress, and where do you think the work is headed next?
Thank you so much. And I'll just make a little gesture to thank all those who came before us, like the Dorian group in the 60s. The Lesbian Mothers Defense Fund, all these folks, wherever you may be, thank you. All right. So I see it for at least this issue of gender and identity. We've gone from survival to thriving strongly. That's one thing. We've gone from changing hearts and minds to changing policy and laws. That's a huge thing to do in one lifetime. That really is. So we have gone from running the first Ingersoll support groups, where it truly was all about survival, literally, how we would be able to go out on the street and survive, to now considering all the other aspects of what it means to be human and to be facing gender identity issues. Along the way, it's been a remarkable road towards policy change and learning that you can't just change one thing one time. You have to keep changing it until it's changed. It'll never unchange. And then you change it again. So we have had to learn that over and over and over again. So what I see now is finally the arrival at a midpoint, the beginning of a midpoint perhaps, of a movement that has found a voice, has found faces, has found allies, and is learning not only about itself but about the whole world. I've had the privilege of traveling around the world, and I tell you, it doesn't matter whether you're in some tiny unknown corner of the world, or you're sitting in a penthouse in Paris, it's always the same about who you are and how you bring it into the world around gender and identity. So where we are going, I don't know, but I will guess, and I think it's this, that we are moving so far beyond those old concepts of sickness, evil, sin, pathology. Those are done. But where are we going now? We're going into full humanity. Full humanity for every one of us who's faced these issues of gender and identity and sharing this adventure with others. That's where I think it's going to go, but what it's going to do along the way, that's going to be interesting. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Marsha. And yes, let us have full humanity for everyone in all our ways. So, Monseratt, you're up next. And there's obviously a lot in the news right now regarding immigrants and the immigration process. And would you speak to some of the specific issues facing immigrants who are also transgender?
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about immigration, back in, I believe it was 2013 when DOMA was repealed, and the issue of binational couples was an issue that the LGBT community, really made it a top priority to ensure that DOMA and immigration conversations were intertwined, as many of us who declare love is love, right, knew that love knew no borders and knew that love was unconditional. So it started really in that category of the conversation. So marriage equality and binational couples, and it has slowly evolved to moving into a conversation of detention, where LGBTQ folks inside the detention centers are at higher risk of sexual abuse, 15 times more likely to be raped in detention centers, and most likely to be put in solitary confinement in immigration detention centers. As we know, that's nothing new in the broader criminal justice system. But inside an immigration detention center, you have limited to almost no rights, as opposed to you do have in the criminal justice system, because you have dual process, you have attorneys. And currently, we're having this conversation of families, family separation, and families in detention. But this conversation is not anything new. Under the Obama administration, we had family detention taking place every single day. 34,000 children were also separated from their parents under the Obama administration. And LGBTQ individuals were being denied asylum when coming into this country. There's over 178 countries which is it's still a life-threatening issue if you're part of the LGBTQ community, where there's persecution from governments or from the society itself for just being LGBTQ, let alone if you're trans, there's higher rates of persecution and death. So just recently, as we are currently having this very important conversation of immigration detention, it's been around 3 weeks, I believe it's almost a month now, that one of our sisters, Roxana Hernandez, died in New Mexico Detention Center out of HIV complication illnesses. She had been denied medical care for her HIV treatment and passed away in the hands of ICE and CBP. So when we're talking about immigration, we're talking about LGBTQ lives. We're talking about families who have LGBTQ children. And we're talking about, when we're talking about dreamers, we're talking about 267,000 undocumented LGBTQ folks who are living at the intersection of being both LGBTQ and undocumented. So currently, I think that, I think we all, because of our identities, we kind of get this symptoms of attacks, right? When we see the news of, immigration detention, of families being separated, you kind of get part of your your identity kind of like gets ripped off from you, and then you start feeling sick. So imagine seeing that every day in the morning, like immigration detention, like part of your body gets ripped away, and then you see Roxana Hernandez dying in a detention center, and another part, the other folks who are not LGBTQ are barely starting to understand, but you fully felt it, right? When it happened in the news, you like felt the attack in your heart. And then when you see Claudia Hernandez, who was also shot by CBP in the head, a 20-year-old girl, you get another part of your identity being ripped apart. So think of all these identities just being pulled left to right and just feeling sick every morning of looking at the news, but not giving up, and knowing that, as Marsha mentioned, that people are starting to realize what's happening. People are starting to see the connections. People are starting to see that we alone cannot win this fight, and that we really need our Muslim siblings, that we really need our immigrant brothers and sisters, that we really need our LGBTQ and transgender folks being together at the forefront, united, fighting back. So I think for me, as someone who has had to come out as undocumented when I was 17, as gay when I was 20, and as transgender when I was 24, every part of my identity, it took an entire community to give me that courage to be ready to come out for the other identity. And I think that I'm excited for the new journey, as Marsha mentioned. I'm excited to where we're going to go next, because I think that we're getting it, and I am excited to know that there are allies who are ready to join in that journey with me. So.
Thank you, Monseratt. So Danni, for years you've been one of the central advocates in fighting for Medicaid to cover trans health care. And I'd love it if you could share some about the services that Medicaid does cover, people's experiences in trying to access that coverage, and where you see the need for continued advocacy to address the gaps or the implementation issues.
So my voice is a little weak. I had vocal surgery about 6 weeks ago, so I might be squeaky or poppy or in and out, and I'll probably be drinking water frequently while I talk, so I apologize in advance, but this is one of the first times I've gotten to speak in public since I had vocal surgery, well, 2 vocal surgeries. So so I've worked with folks in New York State, with folks in California, folks here in Washington State and Oregon to expand coverage in Medicaid, which is the low-income health program here in Washington State and around the country, to include access to hormones, mental health care, primary care, blood work, and surgical benefits, a whole continuum of care for trans folks to be able to work with doctors and surgeons to be able to be their full and complete selves. And that work has, been built, as Marsha said, on decades of work that came before. Legal cases, I think the first was in Minnesota in 1977. There was actually a Minnesota State Supreme Court ruling in favor of coverage for trans folks, saying that Medicaid couldn't deny transition-related health care. Well, the legislature in Minnesota very quickly changed the law to specifically exclude trans people, but we've built on a lot. And the reality is that the law, and Dean Spade, who's a law professor at Seattle University and the founder of Sylvia Rivera Law Project, says this often, but oftentimes we're fighting to get the law to say good things about us. And that fight is meaningful in a symbolic way. But the implementation of some of the policies that we fight for is just as meaningful, if not more meaningful, in individual people's lives. But there's very little resources and support to ensure that getting good laws, that means getting good access. And so what we've seen is very spotty access to the care that is supposed to be covered under the policy. Not a lot of transparency here in Washington State, a ton of pushback from policymakers and opposition who feel like this care isn't important. But I think the reminder for me every day, and Karter and I both hear from tons of, and I'm sure Jeremiah and Mose as well, tons of trans people where this care is life or death. 40% of trans people, in multiple national studies we've seen this, 40% of trans people will attempt to take their life at some point in their life, right? And if you apply the national statistic for attempted suicide and completion of suicide, about 1 to 2% of trans people will die by suicide, based on the 40% attempted suicide rate. And that is like a really terrifying and deplorable reality in our communities. And what we've seen in countries like the Netherlands and Sweden, which is where my family's from, that when people get access to care, those numbers plummet drastically down to the average, which is about 1 to 2% attempted suicide rate, very, very few people successfully completing, which is why I think we fight so hard. The same thing is true in private health insurance. There's just like, in particular, trans women are not allowed to access breast surgery. They're not allowed to have facial hair removal, which is medical. Any trans woman will tell you that. It's the most requested service so that trans women can walk down the street and be safe. Being visibly trans for people who are assigned male at birth often results in violence, in severe violence, in beatings. I've personally been attacked. I'm sure other trans folks on this panel have experienced harassment or targeted violence, and that is a serious healthcare issue. And so that is like an issue of like, we've been in the process for about 6 years with the healthcare authority to try and expand and then ensure implementation and have accountability and transparency and then reevaluate the program, how's it working. And those systems are incredibly slow to change, and it's people's lives that are on the line. And I think we see that every day. And it is very, very real to try and like make sure that people are getting the care that they need and that they are legally entitled to. That answer your question?
That was a great answer. Thank you. And thank you for letting this be one of your first public appearances. I appreciate that very much. Jeremiah, you lead Pride's work on educating Washingtonians about their trans family, friends, and neighbors. Could you tell us about some of the challenges and progress that Transform Washington has experienced in doing this vital work?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the challenges definitely start here in Washington State, but also nationally. Only about 16% of folks say that they know someone who is transgender, and even within those 16%, that relationship is not a close personal relationship. So that's their son's best friend or the cash register at the store. And so those relations aren't really close. And when we ask the same question of folks about LGBTQ people in their family, that number switches, and it's about 90%. And those numbers those relationships look like my best friend or my son, that really close personal relationship. And so unlike with lesbian and gay folks, when people hear negative narratives of transgender people, they don't have that close personal relationship to say like, no, that's not true. And so for over 80% of our nation's public, their first interaction or knowledge of a transgender person is a lot of times in our media. And so with the movies that have transgender people in it, or news stories that are reported on transgender people. And so one of the most difficult parts is really kind of educating those people who are in those positions who are really creating the stories about transgender people, and making sure that those stories are being correctly narrated about us and told about us. And so this work, I really see the challenges come in 3 parts. And so that external part with how we're educating our public, like we faced 2 years in Washington State, we had ballot initiatives where our general public had to basically vote on trans people's humanity and rights in order to navigate the public and do everyday normal things with our friends and family, just like everyone else. And so making sure that the general public had the right knowledge on transgender people and see us as true, full peoples. And that, of course, extends to our lawmakers and legislators and people in those positions. But then also internally, like everyone on this panel has mentioned, they're doing such amazing advocacy work, and a lot of times, like Danni mentioned, that work is life or death. And so how are we educating people in the public about those issues, realizing that so like a lot of the work that we do is pulling in research, and so we have to make sure we have the right messages and that we're sharing the right stories of people's lives. And so it's whose stories are we telling, and whose stories are we putting out in public. And one of the really big difficulties that we faced is as we're sharing stories of transgender people, really trying to make sure that we're not giving the false representation of who transgender people are. We want to make sure that people see that the storytellers that we have who are upfront sharing their stories, that these are individuals who have lots of different life experiences, and they make up one part of our transgender community as opposed of this is our transgender community. And I think that has been some of the really difficult things in leading statewide public education, of really focusing on like whose stories are we telling, and how are we doing that education around folks. And we've been very successful. One of the things that we've been very successful is with the campaign here in Washington State. We were able to do that same work in Alaska, and those folks were very successful and had their voting public also vote to protect and uphold the rights of transgender people in Alaska. And we're seeing that a lot nationally as well. And so those have been some of those.
Thank you. Karter, you probably figured it was your turn. So, once again in 2020, LGBTQ folks will not be counted in the national census. So you've been working with the King County Council on creating ways to allow queer and trans people to be counted in our region. And I'd love for you to talk about how that process is going and also why it's so important.
Yeah, I think to follow up on what Jeremiah was saying, it's, I think the Huffington Post in 2015 said that more Americans believe they've seen a ghost than think they've met a trans person. Yeah, it's a real statistic, and I like saying that in Seattle because people are like, oh, that can't be true. I think sometimes we forget that we live in one of the trans capitals of the country. And nowhere in our community do our local governments, our state governments, let alone our federal government, give us an opportunity to be counted. And I think that there are really important conversations to be had about how people are counted, the data that government collects. Those are all really important conversations. And not being counted has real impacts on people's lives. If you look at the data from the Night Out count or any other really like community-driven public health efforts, trans people in particular, trans people of color, young trans people are overwhelmingly represented in all the disparate impacts of the housing crisis, of gentrification, of all the things that our communities are trying to grapple with. And when our governments base funding off of demographic data, if we don't show up, then governments aren't showing up for us and aren't providing us services. And our work to advocate for ourselves, to advocate for our communities and our services is that much harder and more difficult. We all on this stage work in different capacities with the National Center for Transgender Equality. And every 2 years they do a national community survey. And there are enough folks from Washington who filled out the most recent edition. So we have a Washington State trans report, and it's 3 pages long. We should have so much more wealth of information than that. That's not enough. And I think that all of us could fill volumes, and Marsha in particular, could fill volumes of the things that we know about our communities. And if we don't see ourselves as a part of figuring out the problem, we'll never be represented with the solution. I think when we talk particularly about the housing crisis and how we work directly with trans folks who are unstably housed or are experiencing homelessness, there's not a single shelter in this city that we would wholesale recommend as safe and affirming for trans people to go to. You know, every day there are trans folks, in particular trans women, who are assaulted in shelters in this city and then kicked out because they're a problem, and then they have nowhere to go, or they're sent to someone on the stage. And we don't have shelter beds, we don't have the resources to help people. And so our hope in working with King County to provide a mechanism for trans folks to be counted in service delivery and any opportunity that the county is asking for this demographic data is to really show how many trans folks live in this community and how the county really needs to do better by the folks in our communities. The Williams Institute out of the UCLA says that Seattle has one of the top 5 highest, biggest trans populations in the country, and there are no services that the county offers that are directly for trans folks. in a real sustained way, and that has to change if we're going to continue to have the biggest community that's not just existing but thriving. And I think that that is like the next place that we're going and pushing for, and being counted is a really important part of that.
Thank you. So Lisa, I'll just let you wrap up this part. The ACLU is litigating a few cases regarding access to health care for transgender individuals, and would love for you to speak specifically about your INSTAT case or about whatever you're prepared to speak about.
Thanks, Michelle. So, as several panelists have talked about, healthcare is a very important issue for trans people, and it's not enough to just have policies. It really comes down to the practice and the implementation. And so even though Washington has a law against discrimination, and the ACA has a policy against discrimination in healthcare, that is often not the case. And so the ACLU is currently litigating a case called NSTAD v. Peace Health. And Peace Health is a Catholic healthcare organization here in the Pacific Northwest. It employs about 16,000 people, so it's huge. And Cheryl NSTAD worked there for over 20 years. She was a medical social worker, and her son Pax is transgender. And Pax, as he hit puberty, was experiencing a lot of distress. And, I think it was Danny that mentioned that for him, getting gender-confirming surgery was a life or death matter. And his doctor prescribed chest reconstruction surgery for him. And when they went to get pre-authorization from Peace Health, because they were on Peace Health's employee medical plan, which is basically like health insurance that you get for your employer, they submit the pre-authorization request with the prescription, with all the required documents, and they get a fax in response. That's a single sentence. And it says, "This member has no coverage for transgender services." Full stop. And so what Peace Health's plan does is it excludes all coverage for gender transition surgery, hormones, therapy, anything. They're just carte blanche refusing to cover it. And, Cheryl was devastated, understandably so. Pax was devastated. And Cheryl understood this was a life or death matter for her son and began researching and looking up everything she could do to fix the situation. And fortunately, she was able to connect with Danny, and Danny was able to connect us with Cheryl, and we brought a lawsuit. In the meantime, the NSTADs were able to pay for Pax's surgery out of pocket, which is a wonderful privilege. Not everyone is able to do that. They paid over $10,000 out of their pocket. They took out a second mortgage on their house. They dipped into Pax's college fund. And so we brought a lawsuit with two claims. So one is under the ACA, also known as Obamacare. There's what's called Section 1557, and that's an anti-discrimination provision, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And we also brought a claim under the Washington law against discrimination, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex and also explicitly says gender identity. So we filed that lawsuit back in October, and Peace Health has come back with a handful of arguments, none of which we think are very good. The first one is that, Pax couldn't have this surgery because he's 16. He's not old enough. That is not under the regulations of the WPATH standards, the World Professional Organization for Transgender Health. That's inconsistent with those standards. Not to mention, they didn't actually make a determination based on medical necessity, right? They just don't cover it at all. So it's a little bit disingenuous to come back and say they're not covering it because of his age. The second reason they came back is that they're saying discrimination on the basis of being transgender is not discrimination on the basis of sex. And I want you to think about that for a little bit. It really does not make sense. Being transgender, just the word itself is you are transgressing gender. It is based on gender. It is based on sex. And they're saying that is not what the statute says. So we're pushing back on that. And the third reason that they came back and said that they didn't violate the law is because they're a religious organization and they should be exempt from these discrimination laws. And so I want you to think about those 16,000 Peace Health employees. And here's Peace Health saying that they can discriminate against all of them on the basis of sex or on the basis of any other reason that they say is religiously motivated. We think that's just inherently wrong, but it's also not what the law says. So we are fighting this case. Pax now that he's had his surgery, is flourishing. He's doing wonderful. He's recently been accepted. He just graduated high school. He's going to art college in Cleveland, and we are excited about this case, and we're optimistic about the outcome of it. But this is an example of, ways that the ACLU is trying to hold organizations accountable to these laws and these policies, and make sure that what's the law on the books is actually what's happening on the ground.
So before I open up for your questions, I just want to give each panelist an opportunity to speak to how you would like to see allies supporting your work. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Jeremiah again on the end. We'll just come all the way back toward me. Or Monseratt can go first.
So I would like for you all to take one of these, take a picture, post it on Facebook, and alert all your friends that if they see ICE in the community to call the hotline right away. And to spread this number, because the more that we can get this number out into the community, the faster and the better that we can stop deportations.
There's so many things, but I think the biggest thing is to really examine the ways in which transphobia shows up in your life, and in particular the ways in which we've all been taught to trust or not trust trans people. And I think some of the work that we've talked about and the advocacy that we're doing is not really just about fixing the system as it is, but building a brand new system. And I think trans people have a lot of things to teach non-trans people. And so I would think about the opportunities you have to learn from trans folks, particularly as we interrogate really what the meaning of gender binaries are, of the current healthcare system, that I don't think anyone in this room would be like, that's working great. I think that trans people have a wealth of knowledge, and hopefully we're at a point in our world where it's not just about our stories, which are really important, but what we have to offer and teach you all.
I think this is a really great question. A thing that I tend to think a lot about is, as like we've built Gender Justice League over the last 5 years, the reality of where trans communities have been for the last 40 years is that we have been structurally and systematically shut out from lots of employment opportunities, lots of educational environments where we've been pushed out or experienced violence or been discriminated against. And so within our community, we have incredible leadership. We have incredible power and passion and energy. What our community lacks are economic resources. So our community tends to have 4 times the unemployment rate of the general population. We know that from the US Trans Survey. I was on the executive committee that did the survey nationally, and we really dug in deep here at Washington State. I'd encourage you all to read that report. And we know that we're 4 times more likely to live below the poverty rate. We're twice as likely to be unemployed. And I think like ways that people can give back is that oftentimes we have great leadership. We might not have really specific skill sets that nonprofit organizations need. And we rely on cis people who can show up with cultural humility and figure out how to plug in a really non-intrusive, humble, warm way to take the leadership of trans people, but offer really concrete skills. I feel like oftentimes what we lack, I'm sure Karter has this sometimes too, is like we might not have somebody to do something like accounting, like help us like figure out how to create an internal accounting system, or help us like do very basic things like create a database that we can then use to call our supporters, or build a website and manage that process, right? I'm a medical social worker. I've got like the policy advocacy diviness down, but like if you ask me to build you like SQL database so that we can like have the back end of our website work well, like I'm gonna need somebody else to do that. Now I can tell you what we need or what the end goal is, but like I'm not the person that's doing that. So I think that that's the kind of solidarity that in small organizations, like community-based organizations, not just in trans community, but in communities of color, that kind of like, I have a specific skill set, I know how to do this thing, and it could be any type of technical skill really well. Reaching out with an offer of like, I can do this like 3 hours a week is huge. And we have some folks who come in and do really amazing basic stuff for us, like balancing our checkbook, helping us get our accounting system and do our accounts receivable and payable. Just really, really small things like that is super powerful and allows us to spend our time more wisely to help actual individuals. So that's like a version of allyship. I'm all about the like, I love Seattle's progressive values, but like, what are you doing? Like, what's the thing you're doing? Like, are you doing a thing? And what is that thing? Because I love your values and feelings. I'm here for it all day long. Like, are you doing a thing for people?
And yes to everything everyone said up here. And I think one of the things too that I think is really important, and with the trans people in your lives and with us up here, is one of the best ways to be allies to believe us. When we say we need certain things, believe us for face value. And then also, not every trans person like ourselves wants to be the educator, and to really respect those boundaries. And I think that's true, of course, not only with trans folks, but with anyone from marginalized identities, that there's people like us who love to share their stories, ask us questions, but not all trans people. Thanks.
So tonight is clearly making me think of history, and another set of histories for me is being present when, for example, we had the discussion and the argument around why sex in this state, in the statutes, covers us, and why it happens, and how it happens, and time again, that sort of thing. In healthcare, there have been times when we've had docs present, doctors present, who have helped us immensely. We've had it put together, so we thought. But what history has also showed me is that these things are not set in stone. They can change, and they have. And always there have been others present, nameless others by their hundreds, present to help us move each time. So now my take on this question is this. We are not just we, and you are not just you. We're not like that. We're like this. We are all together in this struggle, because what it means to be human, this is a huge part of that very question. If you sit on the edge of the bed at 3 in the morning and ask yourself the deep questions, you wonder what it means and who you are and how you can be and how you can bring that into the world, that's the same thing. That's what it's all about. That's every single one of us. So I count you all allies in this process. Thank you.
So I'm going to invite your questions now that you might have for the panelists. There's a microphone over there. I'm going to do what I usually do, which is, for those of you who are usually here, which is I'm going to take questions in batches. So just bear with me, ask your questions.